everybody, welcome to today's lecture. So today we'll be looking at prototyping and usability testing. So till this stage, what we have done is we've identified the user needs, their pain points and what they want, their desirability and all those other aspects. And then we have also gone into the idea generation and then idea selection, and finally now we are at a stage where we will be preparing our prototype and testing out our prototype that we have been preparing. So the prototype when we start with is the low fidelity prototype, and it can also be created with paper prototype. So what it means is that it is a mock-up of our idea. It is what our final product will look like. So to get an idea before we go into the whole process of creating the final product, so this prototype helps us get an idea about any further challenges that need to be ironed out. So now some use cases for paper prototypes, which are simple prototypes. We'll talk about them more in the following slides. So the use cases are brainstorming sessions. So these prototypes help the team brainstorm and find any gaps that there may be. Also to conduct design thinking workshops. So they also, we can go through the process of empathizing and then defining and then see that what are the further gaps there. Proof of concept testing. So during the gorilla test, so gorilla test is when we randomly go out and get our prototype tested. So for example, for this we will not be identifying our subjects. At this stage we will probably go out into the public area and identify people who will be willing to test out our prototype. So it will give us an idea that how are they using our mock-up, and are there any areas or steps where they are getting confused or they're not able to proceed or they are unable to understand. So a few limitations of course are there, that this random sample may not be very much aligned to the users that will be finally using our application, but still it gives us a fairly good idea that what are some of the pitfalls that the users may come across while using our final prototype. Then also hackathons and design sprints, they are other areas where the prototypes can be tested and identified for any potential challenges. So some of the benefits of our paper prototypes are that they can be made by almost anyone. So it does not require special kind of expertise, but just an understanding that how people interact with media, how do they interact with, for example, a smartphone application, and what could be the possible interactions that they would like, how would they like to browse, and so on. So now anyone can be a creator of these prototypes. That is one good advantage. The other is that it helps in the team building exercise. So the entire team is working on preparing the prototypes, so there will be inputs coming from the various team members, so that also builds the rapport of the team, and multiple minds put their thoughts together, so that acts as a positive exercise. They are of course a low cost because they are being made with minimum resources. We are not going on to the computer at this stage or using any softwares or any expensive materials. So we are just maybe using some simple paper to prepare these prototypes. So they are very low cost and very resourceful at this particular stage. And finally, the less intimidating. So now at this stage, when the user is shown these prototypes, so they know that these are the preliminary stage prototypes. So at this stage, the user will not hold back. They will be very forthcoming with what do they really feel that they are facing while using this prototype. So any kind of problems that they are facing, they will be very open about it. If this prototype were, for example, a high fidelity one, which was almost a lookalike of the real prototype, they may have held back thinking that their inputs may now create a problem for the researcher, that they will have to go back to their desk. But here, because it's initial stage, so the users are also very open about sharing their problems that they're encountering. Now, for creating these paper prototypes, we need very minimal materials. So we need paper, or there are some ready-made templates also which are available. And we need pen and markers and rulers, stencil, and scissors. So these are the items required to prepare these wireframes. And how the wireframes are to be prepared. So we can see here there is a template, example of a template of a cell phone, mobile phone, and these wireframes need to be drawn quickly. These prototypes that we are making, the page, for example, the landing page of a particular e-commerce website. So we will be drawing it quickly. We will not allow the brain to interfere too much with our process. And here we'll also consider that when somebody is reading this text at this particular scale, because we'll be cutting out this template at 1:1 scale, which will be a realistic replication of the actual screen that we use. So now the text size becomes important, because if we are able to read it, that means the user will be able to read it as well. So that helps us determine the size and also the typeface, what typeface is most appropriate for the amount of text that we are adding there. Then we have to keep the audience in mind, their grasping power, their level of intelligence, can they understand the text that is written. We have discussed this in previous lectures also, that we have to use language which is being used by people nowadays. It cannot be Victorian language or very futuristic language which most of the people will not be able to understand. So we have to keep in mind that we are designing for real people, and we have to keep the information and the way we are conveying it very real so that people can connect with it. Also, we can see in the diagram itself, few important points have been mentioned, that we have to maintain the visual hierarchy between the components. So we have discussed this, that how the hierarchy is important for the readability, that how we will go from, for example, say text which is much larger, and then we will go into smaller and smaller. So the headings are something which are very attractive even in newspapers when we read. So we read the heading, and if it is relevant for us, we'll read the rest of the content. So similarly here also, the hierarchy becomes important. Wherever required, we have to annotate the text as well. Now, for the basic prototype or the initial prototype, we usually use lorem ipsum, which is the mock text, which just shows us the place where the text will come. So, of course, that does act as a placeholder, but when we are getting this prototype tested with real people, then it is always a better idea to use the actual text that will be coming in that location rather than using the lorem ipsum, because the connectivity between the application and the user, we will probably lose that, and we will not get the real feedback from the user. So it's always a good idea to use the actual text that we are planning to use in our application. If we have the logo, if it is a particular brand that we are creating the application for, then the logo should also be used, which is of a good quality and which is well drawn for the clients to be able to see it or the users to be able to see it. And also at this stage, we are trying that the user is able to understand the page that we are displaying in front of them, and we are not really concerned about how aesthetically pleasing it is looking at this point. So we want to just see the visibility aspect, that is the user able to read, is the user able to understand the information, do they recognize, say, the buttons that are probably present there, that what is the function of those buttons and so on. So that is the purpose of the prototype at this stage. Now, wireframes are basically a version of how the actual page will appear to the viewer. So we can see here on the right side, these are some examples of the wireframe. So when we are registering on a website or an application, what will be that page which will appear in front of us? Once we click sign up, where will we go? What will be the next page that will appear in front of us? If you want to compose an email, for example, and we click on a button, then what is the next page that opens up in front of us? So this shows us the information between the different screens that the viewer will be able to access once they have entered this particular application. Now, low fidelity wireframes, of course, again are very simple and basic wireframes. So it is the skeleton of the particular application that we are designing. So it is just going to show us in a basic way that what will be the different pages, how will they appear and how will they be connected with each other. And the high fidelity wireframes are the ones which almost look like the final application. So they will be very polished, they will be very clean and with the actual images and the right contrast between the colors. Whereas in the low fidelity wireframes, we'll probably make them black and white. We will not be concerned about the contrast at this point. So this is the broad difference between the low and high fidelity wireframes. Now, so looking a little bit more into the low fidelity wireframe, so we have an example here on the screen. So we can see that at this particular stage, we have not added any images. You can see that the text that is mentioned is lorem ipsum, and then we have a rectangle which says button. We also have some squares and with these crosses which show that there will be some image that will be added here, and below that again there is some text, and then again the lorem ipsum is there in bold and the font is larger. So that means it is again a heading, and underneath that heading again we have few images. So it is showing us the structure of what the page will appear. On the neighboring side also, we can see it's a slightly more refined version of this low fidelity prototype. We can see here that now the button has some color, there is some contrast between the text and the button's color. The font has been sort of refined a little bit, but these both are the examples of how low fidelity wireframe appears. So some of the characteristics are that it presents us with basic visuals and information. So of course, at this point, for this particular page, we don't know what image is going to come, but we know that to really showcase the work of the particular platform, some images will be required so that the viewer can engage with the application and they can spend more time on the application. At the same time, they will get more information out of this interaction. Also, this helps the team visualize and test. So the team will be able to visualize that finally how will the application appear like, and it will also allow them to test it out and see whether it works well with the users. Do they enjoy this application more in this particular format, or is there some change which is required where the users are not able to connect with this particular wireframe. And here we can see that in the high fidelity wireframe, now we can see some images have been added. So rather than lorem ipsum, which is there on the left side, on the right side we can see it has been replaced with the text embrace peaceful oasis. So, and we can see instead of that square with the cross, we see an image, and below that we see the heading has now a certain text to it which we can understand, which says what we do, and there is a small little paragraph of 3 lines which talks about what they do. Again we have another heading which is popular collection, and below that we now have 4 different samples of the collection that this particular brand is offering, and below each of these images there is a little description of that particular product. So now when we compare this with the low fidelity wireframe that we saw, we can see that the text is much more refined, the typeface, the style, the size, all of those things have been taken care of. We can see also that the color is also much closer to what an actual application will appear to us, the media and interactions. So when we are clicking on a button in a low fidelity, once we click a button, the next page that we see will again be a low fidelity page. So how the next page would appear for the user. But in a high fidelity wireframe, once we press the button, so it will be linked to what the next page will look like, and it will give a more realistic view to the user. So there this connection will be seamless, and if there is any other interaction with the user, for example there is some animation that will come up by pressing a button. So in the high fidelity wireframe, we will see that animation take place, or some maybe the waiting wheel will go around. So those things are now added in the high fidelity wireframe. So now once our prototype is ready, we have prepared our prototype. So we will be testing their usability, that whether they are doing their purpose, fulfilling their purpose or not. Are there still any more wrinkles that we need to work on? So all of those things we'll come to know when we do the usability testing. So the process of testing designs usability using a representation sample of the users is known as the usability testing. So here we will be, with the help of people, with the help of users, we will come to know how usable is our product, because at the end of the day, the application or the website needs to fulfill its purpose. So we have already discussed in length in the previous lectures that how the primary function of the application needs to be fulfilled, which is to be useful, and for that we will take this sample from our population and we will test it out on them to see that how usable it is for serving the purpose. And now it can be applied to several design kinds and typically entails watching people as they try to finish the task. So when people are using this prototype, so we will be noting how they are going about this activity, and are there any particular points where they halt, where they get stuck, or they make some error. We also discussed earlier that how we want our applications and final designs to be error free. So is there some confusion that is making them, create some kind of a mistake and there is some error that takes place? So all of those observations we will make while the user is interacting with our application. So there are 7 steps in the usability testing process. So the first is planning the test. Second stage is determining sample size and recruiting the participants. The third is preparation of material. Then next is experiment setup and environment. Fifth is conducting the test itself. Sixth is to analyze the data, and seventh is to get the final results. So now we'll discuss each of these steps a little bit more in detail. So just like any other activity, for example, if we are going out to cook a particular dish, so the first step will be planning that do we have all the ingredients ready with us, do we have salt, oil, etc., vegetables, and then we will gather all of those and then step by step we'll proceed. So here also we will be looking at the objectives. What is the objective? Just like a dish, whether it will be sweet or sour or salty. So here also what is our objective, what are the methodology that we will be following, and the team's participant selection process, how will we select them? There are various ways in which we can select them. One, for example, is your snowball sampling. So which method of sampling are we using? How are we selecting these users, or are we using stratified sampling? So all of these things we have to decide before we start conducting the test. And what will be the protocol? How will we be conducting this test? How much time will we give to the participant? Where will they be sitting? All of these planning and this whole organization of the study, how we will be carrying it out, all of that is done at this first stage, which is the planning of the test. The second is determining the sample size and recruiting the participants. So now we have to know that for this particular application, for example, that we are designing, how many people would we require to test it out for us, so that we can get a fairly good idea that is there any problem the user is facing. So if it is, for example, meant for elderly, so there is this application that we have designed for elderly to, for example, note down the medicines that they have taken during the week. So of course then our participants will be elderly people, because it is specifically designed for them. Now if we ask any 20-year-old to use this application, maybe it will be very easy for them to use that application, but because our user group is elderly, which will probably say 55 or 60 year and above, then we will get those participants who are in that particular age group. If our application, for example, any e-commerce application is catering to children, adults, elderly, everybody, male, female, all kinds of people, then of course we will have to take these participants from each of these categories to see that they are able to understand. So of course those participants will need, the basic requisite will be that they should be able to read and understand the text, the language that is there. So now we will be choosing the participants. So how are we going to select these participants? That also becomes important. So again, going back to the example of the elderly and tracking their medicines. So now will we randomly select elderly? When we select them randomly, so we may get, for example, majority of male participants and we just get maybe 1 or 2 female participants. But when we go for, say, stratified sampling, then we will select randomly from the male participants and randomly from female participants. So in that case we will end up with almost equal number of participants of both the genders, and that will give us a better idea, because there may be differences in male and female also when they are accessing these applications. So the next stage is the preparation of material. So here we will be preparing the test material which will help us determining the kind of outcomes that we are expecting or hoping from our experiments or tests that we are going to be conducting. And so the test environment, which we have to decide whether it will be in person or will it be through online mode that will conduct it. So all of those things have to be designed. The next is the experiment setup and environment. So if we are conducting this experiment in the real environment, then where will the participants sit, and will it be in a lab, will it be in the office? If it is being done remotely, then how will we be conducting it? So all of those things we have to consider, and these are broadly 2 types of methodologies. So one is when we are doing it in person and the other when we are doing it remotely. The fifth point is conducting the test. So here we will be conducting the usability test on the volunteers who have agreed to participate in our study, and here we will preferably do a dry run test with the team in advance, which means that we will do a little bit of an exercise within the team itself before the actual participants start participating in our test which we have designed. And now this helps us to determine, are there any small issues which are minor but which can be corrected quickly before we go for the actual testing of it. So this is also known as the pilot testing, and it is advisable to conduct a pilot testing because that helps us just tweak if there are any small issues. It could be a manual error, it could be something that we missed. So that helps us conduct this. So when we conduct the test on the actual participants, then the chances of facing these errors will be much lesser, they will be reduced. So once the test has been conducted, now we have to analyze the data. So we will be here looking at how the team performed, how the participants performed, and we'll be looking back at the data that we have collected. So if we have, for example, taken a video of the participants testing our prototype, we'll be looking at, for example, the time that they have taken to finish a task. That can be a good measure of analyzing. So if we, for example, for the pill application, the example I gave earlier, so if we are looking at how the male participants interacted with the application as compared to female participants, and we see that one of the participants, one of the genders is taking a slightly longer to finish one step, then we know that, okay, some tweaking is required here because this step may be confusing for them. So this helps us in getting these insights which are important for the final improvement that we have to incorporate in our application. And of course, that means that we have the result after analyzing that what are the parameters or areas where the improvements may be required, or what are the areas which are working seamlessly and no improvements are required. So that helps us with the final version of the application, that how we can come up with the best possible design of our final application in this particular case. Now, planning the test. So we have to be careful and determine the objectives. So for example, if you take an example that the design elements that we have used might have contributed to the applications, these 4 points that we see here: aesthetic appeal, clarity, consistency and navigation. So we have to be clear that what is the particular objective for which we are conducting this test. Are we checking the clarity, the navigation? Because we have to inform the user, we have to give them certain step by step instructions. So for example, if for my pill application, I want to understand that will the user be able to select the medicine for Monday, if there are different medicines for Monday and Tuesday. So will they be able to understand that which medicine is to be had on Monday? So I will ask the pertinent question which deals with that particular medicine name and the day, for example. So is there any clarity that this medicine is to be taken on Monday only and not on Tuesday? Again, if the purpose is the aesthetics, that how pleasing the application is to the user, then we have to determine the test that we are creating, which will help us determine the aesthetics, that whether they find it visually pleasing or not. So similarly, for our prototype, we have to be clear that what is the objective of the test that we are conducting. So now, planning the test. So the particular stage includes outlining the objectives, methodology of the test, the team participant selection process, the crucial data that the team has to gather. All of those things need to be mentioned there. So now we can see two examples here. So these are two examples of wireframe set 1 and wireframe set 2. So to begin, we first select the desired iteration of our high fidelity wireframe. So now we see the same content, but in a different manner it has been organized. So the purpose here is, for example, to see that which particular organization will the users prefer, which particular prototype is more appealing. So that will help us, for example, design our landing page, that where there is more clarity, are they able to understand the information, the different headings, the different buttons that are present there. So again, continuing in planning the test, we have to determine that which type of tests are required for the different objectives that we have. So like we saw earlier, so whether it is aesthetics, clarity, the navigation that we saw, what are the important functions that we are testing it on. So now here is the example of task based testing, where the participants need to complete a given task. So for example, a simple task like, can you identify the exit button, or for example, add the item to the cart. So giving these small tasks, or tick OK or tick yes, I have had my Monday's medicine, for example. So these are small tasks that the one who is giving out the test, they will give this instruction to the participant that okay, now in this prototype you have to add these two medicines to the cart, can you do that? So we will then see that how much time or how much effort, or how are they locating that item and then adding it to the cart. So this whole journey will tell us whether it was an easy step or whether it was a cumbersome step for them to take. Now another way to go about it is also we can do the A/B testing. So we have two versions of the same product or the same application, and now we have the main, or we can say the control group, which is going to be looking at the version 1, and when we create a second version of the same application, so we give it to the other group B, and now we will be asking them to conduct a few tasks, or their opinions will be checking, and then we will get to know that which is the version that they prefer, whether they prefer the version A that was given or the version B that they prefer. So here we can check various parameters like the ones we saw earlier also, and in addition to that we can see whether they prefer the color palette of version A or version B, whether the font, the typeface, which is more easy to read. So all of those things we can compare and check within the two different types of prototypes. So the preference testing is specifically to test that what is the particular typeface that they prefer. So here we can see that typography is more science than an art. Now here we can see one is incorrect and one is correct. Maybe you can analyze that what is the reason why it is that one of them is preferred by the users over the other one. So now each and every detail that we add to the application is important. It can make it more engaging, make it more enjoyable for the user, and also one can feel very repelled by the application as well. So all these small factors, they add up to the value of the application. So next point is the accessibility testing. So it is very important to check if the applications colors that are being used, they are friendly, and for this we will use the monochrome version to make sure there is enough contrast between the elements, because we have seen earlier that how contrast is really important for readability, for things to stand out, and it also helps in determining what is important, what is less important. So now it is also important to understand how easy it is for the user to understand the language and its simplicity. So all of these things together, the choice of color, the palette, the contrast between the colors, and the language and simplicity, all of these things will together determine whether the user is having a tough time navigating through it or whether it is an easy application to navigate through. So we can see two examples here. The one on the left is not a very good example of what we just discussed about the accessibility. So we can see that it says save changes question mark, and the options are no and yes, and underneath that we have two options that one can click for further information, one which says read more and the other which says click here. So it is rather unclear that what will be under read more, what happens if I click, what is it that I am going to read, that is not sure. And the next, which is click here, that is also a very ambiguous link, because anyway we are very wary of what to click nowadays. So what does it mean? Why should I click here? A lot of these questions will go on in the mind of the user, and then the trust will be affected because the information that the user is getting is not very transparent. On the other hand, we can see here the under save changes we have save and discard. So that is a much better way to communicate that what is the user, the options for the user. So save changes, so even if the user, for example, forgets or doesn't read save changes, but they can read save and they can read discard, and both of them are meaningful. So save means whatever it is they are working on, save it. Discard means to get rid of it. So that is, both are meaningful terminologies, so the user will be able to understand and proceed accordingly. At the same time, underneath the two links now have more detail to them. So the first link says read the specifications, and the second link says download the user guide. So even though in the first example also the two links would probably take us to these two pages where we will read specifications and we can download the user guide, but because of the way it's communicating, or we can say miscommunicating, the user will probably have some kind of mistrust, whereas on the right side the user will be informed and it is very clear and transparent communication that is taking place with the user. So the accessibility factor is much better taken care of in the example on the right side, where the user knows and they will not out of curiosity click on the link. So they will only click once they feel that they actually have some use or it will be useful for them to click on that particular link. So of course we have to take care that the task is the most important and the efficiency of task completion needs to be taken care of. That is our primary goal. Accuracy is also important. We have seen that how small errors can lead to situations where it can be very embarrassing for the users at times. So how can we ensure that that situation does not come where the user has to save their face or they are feeling embarrassed? Qualitative feedback. So qualitative feedback, like we have discussed, difference between qualitative and quantitative data and feedback. So qualitative is where the user will be discussing at length about their likes and dislikes and other factors. So where we will get a detailed input of the user's experience with our application or the test that we are conducting, and the emotional response. And we have to understand that at the bottom of everything, human beings are emotional creatures. We are social people, and we do respond to emotions positively or negatively. So the application, if it is able to press the strings of the emotions, then the user automatically will feel connected. And if it does not do that, then the user will probably move on. So we also have to add to it the emotions that are an important ingredient here, because that connect with the application, although it is inanimate, but still the user will feel connected, and they will probably become a subscriber or whatever the application requires them to do. So we have seen that we want to understand that how is the user reacting to our application or our prototype. So now some of this information can be given to us by the user directly. So for example, they can answer with yes, no, or depending on what we are asking them, they can give a qualitative answer on why they dislike a particular feature or why they like a particular feature, or what kind of improvement they would want in the particular product. But there is also another way to get this information, which is through the psychophysiological data. So this is how the body responds to certain stimuli that is provided to it, and that is the quick response that we have. So for example, if any one of you have probably read about body language, so although it is not a very accurate way to analyze somebody, but still, so simple things like if somebody is crossing their arms, that means they are little shut off, you do not feel very connected to them. Somebody talking with open arms, they feel very much inviting or friendly. So similarly, the body's response to what it is shown, so we can capture it with the help of certain devices that we will see, and then we can understand that what is going on in their mind. So that will give us a very, we can say, from the medical point of view, that data that can also be useful for the researcher depending on the kind of purpose they are aiming at. So one of the most useful type of data that is being utilized to see whether the user is able to find the application useful or not is the eye tracking. So eye tracking is a device wherein the device tracks that where is the eye movement, where is the eye looking at. Now when we like something, usually humans will focus on that area a little bit more. So, or something which is attention grabbing, something which is eye grabbing. So, we will pay more attention to it. So, when we look at something, when we are looking at particular item for a long time, which means the fixation. So, that means the how long the eyes are stopping on a stimulus. So when it is around 100 to 300 milliseconds, so we can say it is a fixation. So the eye is not just gliding over the information, but it is stopping for a couple of seconds, few milliseconds, and that means that eye has registered the information. And the second is the saccades. So these are the eye movements between these fixations. So if there are, for example, on this page that you are looking at right now, this presentation, so psychophysiological data. So if the eye has hovered over this for around 300 milliseconds, and then we go, maybe we read the fixation, the term fixations, because it is highlighted, it is green in color, it is bolder as compared to the other black text, and then we go to saccades. So what that means is that the physiological data, fixation, saccades, these are the fixations, and the eye movement between these three, those are the saccades. So that is how we can understand these two important terminologies. Now gaze plots are created for each user. So they represent the location, the order and the time that the user is spending on looking at the information or the stimulus that has been presented to them. So now what happens is that if we take this page again as an example, then if the minute we see this page, we see psychophysiological data. So that is, say, one fixation. Then we see the gaze plots again, because there is contrast between this color and the other text color, and maybe the size also, the boldness as well. And then, for example, we see the logo at the bottom of the slide. So now here we will have these three circles. So I have spent a lot of time at the heading, reading the heading. Again, we have used the hierarchy here as well, so that when the viewer is reading this particular slide, they know what is the content all about. So the content is about the psychophysiological data, so that is why it is larger in size. Then we are talking about gaze plots under this main heading. So gaze plots is in a contrasting color, it's bold. So now the second fixation is our gaze plot. So again there will be a circle. And third, for example, if you look at the logo at the bottom, so the third point is there. How much time we are spending on each of these locations will determine that how big is that circle, because now you can imagine that the fixation will show with a circle. So we'll put a circle at psychophysiological, another circle at gaze point, a plot, another circle at the logo, and depending on how much time we are spending, if we are spending more time at gaze plots, then the circle will be largest there. If second we saw the heading, for example, the smaller circle, and the smallest will be at the logo. So this will show us, with the help of this plot, we can see that how the eye movement happened. Again, after the logo, if we, for example, read the word circles, so now the plot has gone back up, and maybe it will come down to say the word each, and again it may move along this page. So when we have any of these other e-commerce websites, so this is a simple text, and usually when text is presented to us, we will just read it from left to right, top to bottom. That is how we read. But when we look at any other application or website like e-commerce, where we have, say, some sale is going on, or there is some important news that is flashing, or there is the whole landing page has changed, summer has gone, winter wear is now coming up. So all of those things will be where our eyes will fixate. So when we enter that web page, our eyes will move around the web page to read the information. And if I am more interested in winter wear, for example, then my eyes will fixate on the winter wear where that information is present. I will maybe ignore the other information. So then one can track that what is the way in which I am reading this particular page. So this gaze plot will be generated for me, that when I entered this application, where did I first go? Did I go right, top left, middle, where, how did my eye start moving around the page? And for this, my gaze plot will be generated, which will be made up of these circles of varying diameters depending on how much time I'm spending there, plus with the lines which show that how did I move about this page. So that is the gaze plot, and for each and every participant there will be an individual gaze plot, because everybody will have a different way of reading the page that they are shown. And when this data is analyzed, then we can see that where is the maximum fixation of the users, and is there any pattern that we see, that how the user is reading this particular page. So this gives us a important insight into how the users perceive the information. Pupil dilation, of course it is said that the pupil dilates in certain conditions, the eye pupil, and the light also has important role to play on the dilation of the pupil. But for the cognitive effort and for something that one likes, the pupil dilation can give an indication that the user is wanting to spend more time looking at this, or the cognitive effort that they are putting in is more or less. So that can also be an indication. Now, neuroscience area is something which offers tools to measure the cognition, and depending on the flow of blood in the brain, how much blood is there, how much is it rushing. So there are various tools to check that. For example, fMRI, which is the functional magnetic resonance imaging, and these are devices including EEG, which is the electroencephalogram, which measure the electric signals from the brain, and they tell that which lobe is active. So in the brain we have several lobes, the frontal and occipital, many lobes are there, and they all have different functions. So depending on which, how the brain activity is going on, we can see that how the brain is responding to the stimulus that we are presenting to it. So this helps us detect the change in the brain activity, and that helps us understand the internal working of the brain. So now, studying emotions, we have discussed that how emotions play a very important role, and even though the application may be inanimate, but still the emotions, if it is able to generate in the user, then there will be a connect, and that of course will be positive for the app developers. So we need to understand that what users are feeling while they are interacting with the interfaces. So there are these two broad components we can see. First is the arousal and the second is the valence. So arousal is the level of intensity of the emotion. So if somebody is feeling suddenly, if there is a puppy for example, when we see a puppy or we see a cute baby's face, so there is this feeling that is generated. We feel very warm when we see these cute little beings. So this arouses our brain to feel warm, and we feel cuddly and we feel very soft towards them. So heart rate, EEG, blood pressure, all these measures can tell us that how the brain is getting this stimulus. We feel very warm, we feel very relaxed, and a lot of positive feelings rush into us. So that tells us this arousal. And the valence is the degree to which the emotion is positive or negative. So when we see, like I said, a cute puppy or a kitten, so we feel positive. But when we see maybe something which is not as pleasant, then we do not we have a negative emotion. So when we see maybe a dead animal or we see some unpleasant situation, so that makes us feel the opposite. So now this can be studied by using basic tools like Likert. We can also take the response of the user. So 5-point Likert scale, where it ranges from, one which says least like, for example, to the highest which is like excellent, for example, and in between we have neutral and somewhat I like and I like very much. So in various ways this scale can be designed. So this scale also points us, it tells us how the user is responding to the stimuli that they are getting, whether they are liking it or whether they are not liking it. So if the sewage, for example, in a locality is open, the drain is open, so there will be a lot of smell, there will be some rodents there will be flies. So on the Likert scale, it is expected that the user will point or tick the lowest possible grade, and where there are covered drains and which are cleaned regularly, there we are expected to see the highest or excellent grade. So this is one way. Questionnaires are another way, where the question is asked and the user is responding to the question. Also the memory recall task, where the user is asked to recall and their response tells us whether that situation was pleasant or unpleasant. And but for higher accuracy, these are all subjective responses. But if we want the objective response, then for that purpose we will need to use devices for data, like we'll need heart rate, we'll need fMRI, EEG or skin conductance, and of course these will work under different conditions, like for example skin conductance. Now if there is an exam or if we are going on a stage to perform, then suddenly we will feel very sweaty, but in other conditions we will not feel the sweat as quickly. So again it depends that which of these tests is the best measure. Because if I ask somebody to recall about the drain, and the drain is not a very pleasant experience for them, but still their palms will not sweat. So maybe that is not the good measure for us to test out their emotions using this particular test. For that, maybe the heart rate would be better, because maybe their heart will start racing, or maybe the EEG is a better parameter. So that, of course, the team has to decide. And at the same time, for conducting any of these tests using any of these data which requires these body parameters, so the ethical considerations also need to be followed, wherein the ethical clearance is to be received by the researcher before they can proceed with these tests, which generally are safe, but in certain cases they may be unsafe. So taking precautions and taking the ethical clearance always is advisable. So with this, we come to the end of today's lecture, and I will see you in the next class. Thank you.